Welcome to all the Drama for Life Masters Research Scholars. I've been asked to offer this lecture as part of your research method series. And the title, as you can see, is Phenomenology, Phenomenologists, and IPA, or Interpretative Phenomenological Analysis. Now, it all sounds very complicated, but I want to make it as practical as possible. So I'm going to break it up into three different sections. The first is briefly looking at the theory, phenomenology as a field of philosophy. The second aspect will be taking some experiential practices so that we can really understand what it means to be a phenomenologist. And then in another online lecture, I'll give you more detail and some practical ways that you could work with IPA, Interpretative Phenomenological Analysis. So let's get started. Phenomenology, as I said, is one of the fields of philosophy. And you're probably already familiar with many of the others because they underpin our different research paradigms. So ontology is one. It's the study of being, or what constitutes reality. And there's two quite distinct ways of viewing this. There's the sense of objective reality that's out there and can be measured through the scientific paradigm. But we also explore a subjective reality, and that differs from person to person. And it's actually mediated through our senses by how we interpret the world. And this is called interpretism. So then there's epistemology, which I'm sure you've explored with other lecturers. It's the study of knowledge and how we know. So once again, just to provide a contrast, there's the scientific paradigm, which is what we call positivistic. It states that objects have an existence separate from the knower. So the epistemology is one of objectivism. We imagine the researcher as someone who's separate from what they're studying, and their work is to record and to identify and to find out what exists in this external world. Whereas with interpretive epistemology, it's much more subjective, and it's based on the phenomena or the events or objects or experiences that we have as an individual. And then, of course, there's logic, another branch of philosophy, which looks at the study of valid reasoning. Or ethics, which is the study of right and wrong and how we should act. And some of you may be interested in that in terms of transformative paradigm, looking at how the world should be, if there was greater equality, for example. So phenomenology is this fifth field or branch of philosophy, and it's the study of our experience. And really it looks at us as an individual, being very aware of what we are experiencing in our body, in our heart, in our mind. So in terms of some modern definitions, and phenomenology goes back a bit, but it's very contemporary. So Sokolowski in 2000 defined phenomenology as the study of human experience and the ways things present themselves to us in and through such experience. And we'll talk about all the ways that we do experience the world in a moment or two. And then Smith, who's actually one of the key theorists and writers on interpretive phenomenological analysis, explores this as the study of structures of consciousness as experienced from the first person point of view. So we often talk about the third person point of view, which is again more the scientific paradigm. It's objective. It says there's matter out there and we as the researcher need to find it. The second person point of view is quite interesting. It's somebody else reporting on what they see in the subject of the investigation. But today we're going to really focus on first person, which means that we investigate our own consciousness. We are the phenomenologists. And we study our experience from the point of view of living through it. So it's experience that is performed or that we're really conscious of doing. And in addition, of course, as phenomenologists, we now research others. We conduct interviews with them or focus group meetings, or maybe we even ask to look in their diaries so that we can find out about their lived experience. So the key aspects of this research method is that reality consists of objects or events, or we use this Greek word phenomena, which actually simply means appearances, things which appear in the mind, as perceived in our human consciousness. So when we talk about consciousness, it really means we know what we're experiencing at the time. It's not reflective. We'll get onto that just now. So the study of our lived experience and the meaning we draw from that is foregrounded in this type of research. And what's quite interesting is that lived experience is often seen as pre-reflective. So it's experience as we experience it in the moment, whereas reflection involves looking back, talking through our experience. And that's often what we do in therapy, for example. We have an experience, we haven't made sense of it, we talk it through with somebody else, and then we can understand our own way of relating to the world or whatever it might have been that caused us some difficulties. Another key aspect of this method is intentionality. So it's really about how we direct our focus, and that's essential. It means there's a sense of knowing what we're doing. And then this next part is interesting. It shows quite a fundamental split in some of the broad research areas, because we talk about an embodied mind. You may have heard of the Cartesian split. That was a philosopher called Descartes, who looked at this duality between the mind and the body and said they're two very different things. So the mind continues to exist all the time, but the body, you can cut off parts of it, or, it's separate, it's made of matter. And what happened with this Cartesian split was that it led to a particular type of medical research, which looked at the body sort of as a machine and how to make that machine operate most effectively. And it kind of left out the whole realm of mind-body medicine, which shows how we influence the health of our own body. So you may maybe look at it as the difference between kind of Western medicine and traditional healing that's conducted in Africa, which really looks at the human being within their context, their cultural context, looks at their mind, how they are experiencing the world, and sees all of that as part of health and well-being. So this Cartesian split has been very influential, but what we're finding now is that we're bringing the mind and the body back together. So this embodied mind, which is a term used often by Francisco Varela, I think he was from Chile, and what he says is the body is physical, obviously, it moves, there's mechanisms that have let me lift one hand and put another one down, but it's also a lived experience. And you all know that within the world of drama, that we feel things through the body, we absorb the world, we move, we express ourselves through the body, and the mind and the body circulate back and forth. So there's this sense of the outer world and our inner world coexisting. It's not one thing or the other. So the body is both biological and phenomenological. That means it experiences. And we kind of shift back and forth between them. Another really key aspect of this method is reflexivity, which of course you do in your critical reflexive praxis course. And that involves being aware of how we as an individual, particularly in the role of researcher, influence the world around us. So influence the research project or the data that we gather. If we're interviewing somebody, we have that subtle or maybe not so subtle impact on them. And then a final concept, if you like, in terms of this style of research is what we would call bracketing. So it's where the researcher is aware of their own biases or their presuppositions, so that when they're asking someone about their lived experience, or what we call their life world, we don't project our own meaning onto that. So phenomenology is really about asking people to describe how they draw meaning from the world. And at the preliminary stages, we don't interpret that at all. We draw that rich data from people's own lived experience. I hope some of these aspects will become a little clearer as we continue. So then we can just very briefly look at some phenomenologists. So the most cited, if you put this word into Google Scholar, you'll mainly see Western phenomenologists referenced. So there was Edmund Husserl, Martin Heidegger, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Maurice Merleau-Ponty. And I won't talk particularly about their writing. If you're interested in this field, of course, you'll have time to research. But what I want to do is just give you those names so that you understand where these ideas have been drawn from. But of course, we also have African phenomenologists. They include W.E.B. Du Bois, Frantz Fanon, and Lewis Gordon. And again, maybe read up on some of their work. But what they were able to do is write about their own lived experience and then generalize that to the wider population. So very fascinating work, which may have influenced some of your research. And then, of course, the area that many of you know is part of my practice and interest and inspired my own research. And of course, my research used this particular method, this interpretive phenomenological analysis, is what Hindu or Buddhist philosophers, so from the Eastern wisdom traditions, how they use meditation to train their minds to experience each moment consciously. And we sometimes use the phrase bare attention. So really being able to notice what's happening right in this moment without adding concepts, without drawing ideas or opinions from the past, but getting a very pure engagement or experience of the world. So we will explore some of these techniques so that you can cultivate your skills of phenomenology. So let's start with activity 1, and I've divided into 4 different sections. So we'll build one on top of the next. And what I'm going to ask you to do, as you can see here, is sit in silence just for 1 minute. I'll use the timer. So make sure you get comfortable. We don't want to sit in discomfort for a whole minute. And I won't give you any more instruction than that, but just get a sense of what you experience with your embodied mind, as it were. So let's begin. So that's 1 minute complete. So what I invite you to do here is to find your journal or your notebook and just write down 1 to 10. So we'll just make it quite short. But what I want you to do is reflect back on that minute of silence and note down at least 10 things that you experienced. So I'll do it with you, and then we have a sense of how long it takes. But if you need more time, of course, you're welcome just to pause this recording. So when you've finished, just put your pen down and we'll move on to the next slide. So look at your list now and notice if any of your experiences included some of the following things. So was there any physical sensation? Maybe you felt a bit uncomfortable as you sat there, or maybe you felt quite relaxed and your body, you maybe noticed your shoulders softening, for example. Maybe you noticed some emotions, boredom perhaps, or happiness that this is a lecture, but you can sit quietly for a minute. So if any of these pop up on your list, you can just tick them or cross them off just to see the sort of general categories of experience. Maybe you notice particular thoughts or ideas or plans, so ideas for the future, or maybe regrets or memories from the past. They might have popped up as well. Sometimes when we're given a minute of silence, the mind goes in all sorts of places. It takes you on holiday, remembers all sorts of things that you should be doing. And then, of course, information that comes in through the senses. So we mentioned the senses earlier, and that's our way of kind of knowing the world. So what did you see as you sat still in your space? Were you looking at the screen? Were you looking around you? What sounds came to you? Did you notice any taste perhaps in your mouth, or a sense of touch, maybe the seat on your chair, the way you're sitting, or maybe a smell came sort of floating past you, someone cooking, or smell of flowers perhaps. And did you notice other people at all, that sense of connection? And then finally, the question just to ask yourself is, how long did that 1 minute feel like to you? Did it seem longer or shorter than 60 seconds? Okay. So what we'll do is do it again. And this time, of course, you have a greater sense of all the different types of things that you may experience. So I will set the timer, and you can sit quietly and notice your experience this time around. How long did that minute feel? What did you notice this time that you maybe didn't notice before? So these are the skills of a phenomenologist. Really being able to experience what is present in the moment. And of course, then there's that second step of adding concepts or reflecting back and noticing all of these aspects. But it's really about intentionally noticing what we're experiencing right now. This now, and then the next now, and the next now. And of course, that's important for the way we live our own life and the meaning that we gather and find in our own life. But it's also very important for the way that we can conduct this type of research. Because the more aware we are of what's happening within us, the less we will need to bracket. So the less we will impose our views and experiences onto the people that we are doing the research with. So you may have heard this model before, but I thought it might be worth just going over again. And it's really the 4 different stages of learning any new skill. So to start with, we are what we may say unconsciously incompetent. And it doesn't mean we're terrible. It just means we haven't yet acquired that skill. So we're not competent at that skill. And it's often when we as individuals don't quite understand or know how to do something, and we don't recognize that we don't know how to do it. So we may even deny that the skill is useful. And so first we need to recognize our own incompetence or inability, and then we need to value the new skill before moving on to the next stage. So the length of time that we spend in this stage depends on our stimulus to learn. So we had a couple of sessions together just looking at some techniques of bringing greater mindfulness into our lives. And if that felt like it was motivating you, you may have started exploring a more regular practice. So the reason I bring this to mind is that, as we say, the ancients and even contemporary Buddhist and Hindu philosophers, they use these mindfulness practices as a way of really training the mind to stay in the present moment. Because that's the only moment really that we can experience. We can't re-experience the past or predict the future, but we can experience this moment. So if you feel that phenomenology is something that may be useful for you in your work in theatre, in communities, as drama therapists, then this is a chance to find that motivation to shift from the incompetence or the lack of awareness that we need to develop a skill into this very kind of conscious phase of recognizing that we're learning a skill. So this is the second one, conscious incompetence. And it doesn't sound very pleasant. And it's actually often where we feel rather hard, we're rather critical of ourselves, and we're worried about other people criticizing us as well. So we can get defensive in this phase. But this is really the key learning phase. So it's one that's worth moving through. So with meditation, for example, we may find that each time we sit down, we get so distracted that we just don't think it's worthwhile and we give up. But what we're noticing, of course, is how distracted an untrained mind is. So it may not be pleasant, but it's giving us really valuable information. So in this stage, the individual does not understand or know how to do something, but they recognize the deficit. So they recognize that it's something worth doing. And making mistakes can be an integral part of the learning process. And it doesn't mean they're comfortable. It's best to make mistakes in a very supportive peer group where people can encourage us and act more like a coach or a mentor rather than that critical evaluator. So that's why we often learn new skills in a group where we're all learning together and we can feel kind of sustained and supported as we develop these skills. So the third stage, now we're becoming more conscious of our own competence. And this is where us as individuals understand or know how to do something. But it does take quite a lot of mental work. It can be quite tiring, actually. It takes concentration. And as we may have talked about before in the mindfulness world, there are two kind of types. There's the focused attention, which takes a lot of energy. You know, when you're focusing on an academic book, when you're writing an assignment, it's a very pinpointed attention. Whereas open awareness is quite relaxing. We just kind of take in everything without having to do anything. So it's the kind of difference between doing, where we're using our focus, concentration for a particular outcome, and being, where we're open to everything without resistance, without needing to change anything. We're just receiving experience through our senses. So this conscious competence is, you know, where we know we're developing skills. And that's what you do at university. You're learning new skills, you're exploring them. The skills of the researcher, of course. If you're wanting to use interviews, you may find that you don't ask the best question to start with. You may ask leading questions instead of open questions. And, you know, it may not go quite as you hoped. But that's why this is conscious. We practice it. And yeah, it takes a bit of work. But the final stage is something we can look forward to, and it's called unconscious competence. So this is where something is so much part of who we are. We've had so much practice that it's become like second nature. We can perform it easily without having to think through all the steps. Some of you may have learned to drive, and you know how initially you have to think of putting in the clutch, changing gear, keeping your eyes on the mirrors, steering as well, all those, you know, different things. But once you've learned it, it becomes very intuitive. And you actually ultimately find you can drive and your mind is thinking of all sorts of other things. We're kind of on automatic pilot, but still with enough perception that we keep ourselves safe. So as a result of this fourth step, this unconscious competence, we can execute other tasks whilst also doing utilizing the main skill. And it may mean too that it's so much part of us that we start to be able to teach other people as well. So this is what I just wanted to take you through in terms of your journey as a researcher, particularly if you're going to use this type of phenomenological approach, which very much depends on interviews. And we'll come to this in the second lecture. But we need to practice interviews. We need to know how to put people at ease, how to make them comfortable, how to start with questions which will open them up, so that when they share their experience with us, we know that we're getting rich data rather than data which is, you know, kind of modified because of the level of discomfort with the interviewer. Okay, so moving on. Now I'm going to give you a guided practice on fields of awareness, so that we can really start experiencing in a practical way all the different things that go on in each moment, whether we're sitting on our own or whether we're in relationship with others. So once again, getting comfortable, as comfortable as you can be. So normally we want the spine to be up straight. That keeps us awake. It allows the energy to move up and down the spine. Just gently rest the head on the top of the spine, the chin in a little bit. You know, sometimes we drop back and the neck crunches, or we drop forward and then we get very sleepy. So just sit up as much as you can with your feet on the ground, letting the shoulders soften. And recognizing that there's so much to be aware of in each moment, but often we're not. Simply because we're caught up in our habitual patterns of thinking, or we're focusing on one thing in particular and losing consciousness of everything around us. So we start this practice with intentionality, setting an intention that we will keep bringing our mind back to this present moment in order to experience it fully. Many times you'll notice your mind wandering off, and then that is the moment of mindfulness where you can bring it back and settle it back down in this present moment, rather than thinking of the past or worrying about the future. We tend to run on autopilot much of the time. So let's open to all our fields of awareness so that we can tune into the present moment in a much more meaningful way. So as we do this practice, bring a sense of curiosity, inquisitiveness, even playfulness to see what you find. So first, let's become aware of the senses. When we're aware of what we can see and taste and touch, we're in the present moment. And we can learn to appreciate the full spectrum of life that comes in through our eyes, our ears, our nose, our mouth, or through the sense of touch. Our senses pick up information from the outside world without attributing value to it. It's just our mind that later decides, is this pleasant, is this unpleasant, is it neutral? Our senses can simply receive in a non-evaluative way. So let's begin with the sense of touch. You may have your hands in your lap. You may be able to feel the clothing against your skin, or the temperature of the air as it brushes the skin of your face. You can probably feel the touch of the feet on the floor, your seat on the chair. So our sense of touch really takes us into the body and the body's relationship with the outside world. And now opening to the sounds around you. Some might be continuous, some intermittent. Some may be loud and some really quiet. You need to be fully present to notice them. Some may be close by and others quite far away, again requiring that sense of opening our awareness. And now moving to the sense of sight. If your eyes are closed, there may be light on the back of the eyelids, shadows or patterns. And allowing the eyes softly to open, maybe one thing in particular captures your attention. the color, the shape. Also opening the eyes to the horizon. A sense of seeing all around you. And then are there any smells or tastes in the mouth? You may feel the breath as it flows in through the nostrils. So letting the breath now take our attention into the inner world. Feeling, sensing the breath as it moves all the way down the back of the throat, filling the lungs, as the diaphragm expands and pushes downwards. A sense of breathing into the belly. So this is our interoceptive awareness. Awareness of our inner world. Where we feel into subtle sensations of the muscles, the bones, the internal organs. Learning to stay in touch with the body can give us this intuitive, felt sense of the world around us. Remembering that it's not just the brain in the head, but we have neuronal material in the heart, in the gut. We receive messages all the time from the whole body. And now getting in touch with our emotional world, your feelings or mood. And there's no need to try and change them, even if they're uncomfortable. It's simply bringing awareness, experience to the world of feelings. We don't need to get involved with them or the storyline. We don't need to push them away. We may even notice that as we bring attention to them, they sometimes just dissolve away. You might think of an emotion as a turbocharged thought. It can be felt very strongly, even in the body. But when we bring this precise, attentive, and kind awareness to them, we start to realize that they can pass away in their own time. As long as we don't interfere. And now moving to the world of thoughts. Allowing yourself to get familiar with where your thoughts like to take you. Maybe into the past or the future. Or they may like to analyze the present moment, showing preference for something you like or don't like. So seeing if we can be interested in the thoughts without being carried away by them. And next, becoming aware of awareness itself. This may feel like dropping into our center, or it may feel like opening outwards. Experiencing for yourself and see how it is to access this quality of awareness that can take in everything. This deep sense of being, where there's no need to do anything. And finally, turning our awareness to our sense of interconnectedness. Experimenting with our relational world. Maybe first sensing people who are nearby. You may be able to hear them moving or see them. You can also picture and sense into people further away. Sometimes we think about someone and then our phone rings, as if we've somehow communicated. This is the mysterious field of awareness. And of course, this aspect of awareness is very important for this research method. It's about that relational world. Making sure that our role enhances our ability to find powerful, important data, to make deep connections. So it's worth spending time just cultivating these qualities of awareness so that we can bring them into the world around us. And so we bring this practice to an end. And so, as you'll see on the next slide, there are many, many aspects of our experience. There's our temporal awareness that we talked about earlier with the 1 minute practice. It's that sense of time, how when we're doing something that's boring or uncomfortable, time seems to drag. When we're deeply in the flow, time seems to fly by. And it's also that sense of our stream of consciousness. And then we can be aware of, the space around us, our perception, if you like, where we're really using all of our senses. And then attention. We can distinguish between that focused attention I talked about in the practice and our marginal or horizontal awareness, this sense of kind of taking in a full perspective. We can also be aware of our own experience. So we might think of that as self-consciousness. When you're making a video, for example, and you can see yourself on the screen, there's that sense of seeing yourself for the first time. And then there's the other aspect of self-awareness, where we just become aware of ourselves, our qualities, our skill sets, and we can choose which ones we want to cultivate and which aspects of ourselves are better just leaving behind. And then we have this awareness of ourself in different roles, and this so much at Drama for Life. You have your role as student, as researcher, you have your creative roles as theatre makers, your roles in community, and we kind of see a little different part of ourselves, each role we take. And then, of course, embodied action that we spoke about earlier. So really understanding this kinesthetic, this felt sense of the movement of our body and what we can communicate through that movement of our body, embodied action. And then our purpose or intention in action. So this is where we're very conscious about what we're wanting to put out into the world. Often when we haven't brought enough self-awareness to our habit patterns, we unconsciously put things into the world. And we often talk about this: if someone is angry and they walk into the room, we feel that, even if they're pretending that they're okay. Part of us has this capacity for what we call neuroception. It's when the whole body is picking up about whether the environment or the person is safe. So we can often feel that from others. And of course, we do it ourselves. We pretend we're happy, but others can feel, they can read between the lines. And then, of course, awareness of other people. So that involves empathy, which again, you explore a lot at Drama for Life. Intersubjectivity, those relationships between individuals. And then collectivity, that sense of how a community builds and moves together. And this is more where W.E.B. Du Bois and Frantz Fanon, where their work focused. So they looked at themselves as individual, but then they looked at themselves as part of a collective. And then, of course, awareness of our linguistic activity, how we relay meaning, communication, how we understand others. Very often we speak and we think we've communicated something, and others hear it completely differently. And then, of course, social interaction, including collective action, which is important for us when we look more at the activist side of Drama for Life's work. And then everyday activities in our surroundings. So those are all the different aspects that come into phenomenology. And it's really about, as we said before, the life world, the experience of living, and understanding that we have a unique experience. So in that sense, it's relative, but we also have common experiences, and we start to explore and understand that a bit more. So this is a term I mentioned at the start, bracketing. And it involves suspending or setting aside our biases, our everyday understandings, our own theories, beliefs, habitual modes of thought, and our judgments, particularly when we are working with someone else, when we're interviewing them about their life world. And this takes a huge amount of self-awareness. Very often we don't understand our own biases until we're challenged on them. This is what your critical reflexive praxis course is all about, looking at where we have a particular view of the world and then seeing if we can open to contrasting views. Because what phenomenology says is that there's no one view, we each have incomplete views. And therefore we can be open to all different views at the same time as kind of gathering general understandings. So that's what we'll look at in the next lecture. So bracketing also says, the way things appear in our conscious experience may be different from how they are. And I'm going to just do a playful activity in a moment. But we realize that with ourselves, that sometimes we just interpret something completely differently from the way others interpret it or from the way it actually is. And so we must bear this in mind, because when we're interviewing other people, they may truly believe that they are sharing their experience of the world, but we need to read between the lines and understand what is happening that they may not be aware of. That's where, there's this sense of consciousness. And often we do act from unconscious habits or past experiences. And we need to learn how to bring consciousness into everything we do, particularly in relationship. So this is our final exercise we'll do together. I just want you to look at this picture of the dog and simply describe it. So the length of the fur, for example, the coloring, the look on the dog's face, the collar. But notice at the same time as you're describing it, what reactions are you having to it? So for example, if you have grown up with a fear of dogs, or if you were once bitten by a dog, then looking at that picture may, give you all sorts of uncomfortable sensations, even though it's on a screen, it can't jump out, but just the look in its eyes may be telling you that there's danger. That's what we said, this neuroception, it's picking up all the time whether the environment is safe. Whereas on the other hand, if you've grown up with dogs, if you've always loved animals, then you look at that picture and there's a warmth and openness. And what I want us to imagine is that this dog walks into your room right now. What would your response be? So for me, I used to have a dog like that. So it brings up all sorts of feelings of warmth and reminiscing and happiness and, that wish to stroke and to touch. But I may be completely mistaken. If I take my past experiences into this present moment, I may misinterpret the intentions of that dog. On the other hand, if your experience is negative with dogs, you may see this one walking into your room and you may try and run, even harming yourself. What neither of us are doing is actually experiencing the present moment, looking at the dog and really sensing into whether it means to harm or whether it is there for companionship. So this is where phenomenology can really help us get a realistic and a much more skillful way of relating to the world. Because we experience what is actually there, rather than carrying in all our past influences and putting them on top of what's there. So this is the end of our lecture for today, and I will send out some material for the next part of this process, the interpretive phenomenological analysis, which will be useful to read through before the lecture itself is distributed. So we will see how we get on, and please, feel free to give me feedback and to get a sense of if there's anything else you'd like to learn. This is really the introduction and inviting you to train your mind so that you can become a good phenomenologist. You can really experience the world moment by moment, rather than letting all our history come in and influence us, because then we may miss something that is, very important and significant, and a moment that we could actually savor and enjoy. So thank you, everybody, and yes, good luck with the other parts of your research methods. And of course, feel free to contact me. My email is lucyhartmind@gmail.com, and we can talk more about phenomenology together. Take care.